take it away.
Let everyone get settled in. Hi, folks who are joining us. We will get started in just a second. People are getting let into the room. Great. All right, we're gonna go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone to Hillel Home's Building an LGBTQ+ inclusive spiritual community. My name is Marissa Fernandez. My pronouns are they, them, theirs, and I am the Jewish Life Coordinator at Hillel's of Westchester in Westchester, New York. We will first hear from our panelists, and then there will be an opportunity for question and answers from the audience. Just so you know, this event is being recorded, so if you take yourself off of mute, you will also be recorded. SD Klein, they, them, who is a strategic intern and president of the Chosen Queers, Kansas University's queer Jewish student group from Kansas University Hillel, will be taking questions from the audience via direct message. So if you have any questions that you would like to ask anonymously, you can direct message them. SD, would you mind introducing the panel?
Of course. Okay, so today we have with us Rabbi Schicker, full-time spiritual leader of Templ Bnai Israel in Missoula, Michigan. Rabbi Bender, the Rabbi of Bnai Israel congregation in Wilmington, North Carolina. Miryam Kabakov, executive director of Eshel, and Dr. Saundra Sterling Epstein, or Sunny, welcoming Schul's director at Eshel.
Everyone.
Great. So we are going to get started with everyone. So to start it off, we will be going over some questions for the panel that have been predetermined. So I was wondering if everyone, Miryam, Suni, Rabbi Bender, and Rabbi Schicker, could tell us what are some keywords, phrases, or symbols that you've previously used or seen used to help indicate that LGBTQ+ community is welcome in a synagogue?
Well, I'll start. Sunny and I are coming from the perspective of an Orthodox synagogue, and I guess my first thing I want to say is, like, you have to manage your expectations in the Orthodox community because change is happening very slowly, but it is happening. So what we try to do when we work with rabbis through the Welcoming Souls Project, and Sunny can talk more about this, is very subtle. Like, instead of saying from the bima, from, in synagogue when they're giving their sermon, like husband and wife, say the word partner, which allows for a way more expansive understanding of relationship. So that's sort of like where we're starting from. Certainly visual symbols are important. We have a magnet or sticker, another Orthodox ally that we give out to people, similar to the rainbow flag, but a lot of Orthodox synagogues are not putting up rainbow flags at this point. So Sunny, do you want to add to that?
Sure. Hi, everybody. So first of all, this is a process, and it's an educational trajectory that everybody in the Orthodox community is on. it's very different than in the non-Orthodox community, where you've got this synergy and symbiotic connection between acceptance of everybody, and there aren't like the questions that are asked in the Orthodox community. Sometimes non-Orthodox folks will bristle at and say, why are you even asking that? So for example, somebody said, well, I would never sit with a mechitza. Then you're not in an Orthodox shul. You go to a non-Orthodox shul. But if you want to be in this particular environment, the issue is that we have to be beholden to halacha, to Jewish law. And we also have to understand that halacha and the text are often much more understanding and compassionate, not in terms of being makel, in terms of being lenient, but more in being machmir, and being strict about what really matters. One of the first rules of everything in Judaism is pikuach nefesh, saving a life, not endangering a life. So the idea that we welcome, that we want our members to be able to be part of our Orthodox communities is something that we all hold by. And within the Orthodox community, there are those that subscribe to that, and those that often will feel uncomfortable with it, may not be there yet, may not be up on what we know medically, what we know scientifically, what we know in terms of politics, cultural, religion, all of that. But halachically speaking, we're in a good place to say people should be able to come in the doors. And in terms of language to look for, what I tell people is not those that do accept, that do welcome, that do embrace LGBT folks will not necessarily embrace or be comfortable with everything. For example, there might be a difference between a single gay man or a single lesbian woman versus a couple, or a transgender, or a non-binary. So what I do with the welcoming shuls is I ask these questions, and I tell the rabbis, this is a temperature taking. We're not trying to tell you what policies to do. We're not trying to create trouble. We don't want our folks to go somewhere where they're not welcome. What we do want to do is to find out, where can we send LGBT folks who want to be in the Orthodox community and they feel accepted. So a big part of the welcoming language is I see you, I accept you, you're a Jew, you're a Yid, I love you, come in. And one warning here, in terms of doing the interviews that I've done, and I've now done 184 of them, we have to be very careful of inappropriate equivocation. In other words, if I hear a rabbi say, sure, we accept everybody, we accept non-Jews, we accept this, we have people in our shul that don't keep kosher, it's not the same thing. There's a difference between sort of don't ask, don't tell, versus really intentionally reaching out and saying, we understand that you are LGBT folks who want to be observant, and we want you to be part of our community, and it has to be sincere. So that's what I'm dealing with. And a lot of that is educating the rabbis along the way as well. And I agree with Miryam that everybody needs to manage their expectations and realize, what can I realistically ask from this rabbi? And also, the rabbi themselves might be welcoming, but the community might be somewhat problematic. For example, those of you that are in the South, I've had rabbis in the South tell me, we would welcome LGBT folks, right, Rabbi Bender? But if it was my sister, if it was my brother, if it was my cousin, I wouldn't recommend that they live here. So there's a lot of considerations that go into the Welcoming Shuls project and the shidduchim, the matches that I try to make.
So I can jump in from, I guess we can go in Orthodox to Reform order or something, I don't know. And I don't want to speak on behalf of the Reform movement, since I have many respected colleagues there, so I will try to make statements about the conservative movement, and I was yeshivish, so I can speak a little bit to the Orthodox world and my experience there. But I think I would caution to say that just because you're in a more liberal movement doesn't mean that there's necessarily an absolutely accepting congregation. And I also would caution against regional. So I was in Greenwich, Connecticut for 4 years, which is technically New England, sort of a suburb of New York City, and very uncomfortable for me as a queer individual. And now I've moved to Wilmington, North Carolina, and I have way more queer friends than I ever have. So I think that really depends on specific cities. But I would say in terms of keywords, you want to avoid things that just say warm and welcoming, because that really doesn't mean anything. Warm and welcoming is something that synagogues put onto websites because they think that's what synagogues should put onto websites. Same thing with inclusive. That's something that synagogues think they should put onto websites. When people are really warm and welcoming or really inclusive, they actually list. We're inclusive of people with, like we saw today on the Hillel, that if you need closed captioning, if you need blah, 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 not blah, 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 but X, Y, Z, then you know that it's really an inclusive organization. And same thing with warm and welcoming. If warm and welcoming to, if you see the litany, then that's a very helpful thing. I think also, it's clearly very visual, so unless there's captions on the pictures, seeing diversity of pictures or seeing diverse captions of pictures of different kinds of family representation on websites is absolutely key. Sometimes I think it might be more common for liberal movements to put the rainbow on a website. So we don't have a rainbow on our website at Bnai Israel Congregation. Hopefully we will soon. But we do have a banner of a bunch of diverse people holding hands saying, love your neighbor as yourself. We stand against bigotry. So I hope that when someone comes to the website, they'll say, oh, I'm a queer Jew of color. I'm welcome here. I would hope from seeing that sign. So I think we're talking specifically at keywords and phrases. So yes, avoiding the vaguity of warm and welcoming, I think is very, very important. And I can put the floor over to the reform movement here.
I would never say that I speak on behalf of the entire reform movement. That would get me into a lot of trouble. But I am a reform rabbi, and I was ordained by the reform movement, and am, very far on the liberal side of said movement. But I will agree absolutely with Rabbi Bender that warm and welcoming doesn't mean much. It really doesn't. Our website has one of the Keshet logos on it, right? That's like very upfront and clear. My bio includes queer, including my, social media bios. So if people are looking at me specifically, I do identify as such. But I think it's also in the language from the pulpit and a recognition that the leadership have a role not only in making the statements, but encouraging the participation of the community as a whole. A lot of people think they're warm and welcoming. They want to be welcoming, and they realize they sometimes say the wrong things, right? Language changes, what's acceptable changes, and things that might appear to be inappropriate at one point become appropriate at another. A number of years ago at a student pulpit, I talked about the Passover Seder and Haggadot, and I used as an example the fact that there's a Stonewall Haggadah that was put together. And I had a woman who was just a little horrified that of some of the words that were included, including queer, and saying I was taught that was wrong, right? That was rude. I would never say that of someone. And we had a really honest conversation about the shifts in language. So in regards to the leadership, I think that's a big piece of helping people learn the language and modeling so that when people enter the space, they're not the ones who have to do that modeling. I don't think it's fair for LGBTQ people or anyone else to have to constantly say, no, these are my pronouns, or this is the way I prefer to be viewed as, or whatever else. That we need to model accepting people as they walk in and who they are.
Great. Thank you all so much. I feel like we got such great answers, and so just listening to you all speaking and seeing the difference across denominations, I think is really interesting, and you all really talked to that already. I think you've touched on this briefly, all of you, I think. about there sort of being like a discomfort on both sides of like sometimes of like the synagogue clergy or people working there are sometimes like don't always like know how to model the correct space, or like not the correct space, but like space that queer folks might want to see. And like likewise, sometimes it's a little bit uncomfortable for someone who identifies with the LGBTQ plus community walking into a space that they just coming into a space. So I'm wondering, what advice would you offer to LGBTQ plus folks who are visiting a synagogue for the first time and they don't want to dim their LGBTQ plus identity?
So I would pick up with what Rabbi Bender said, and I absolutely agree with everything that you said. I did not mean to make a generalization, or yeah, it's definitely culture. I've had the same thing in northern communities, and absolutely mea chuz, 100%. But I think that the notion of people are influenced by so many other factors. We're isolating the Jewish lens right now, but we're also dealing with cultural lenses, and we're dealing with regional lenses to some degree, and we're dealing with political lenses and so many other things that are going on right now. I had a rabbi tell me from what would be considered a very, very liberal and very open community generally, that he was open and he wanted LGBT folks to come, but the members of his shul felt that that community was so LGBT friendly that they needed the shul to sort of be a haven from a lot of what they were seeing on the streets. And he was trying to negotiate that. So that's really what I think it's looking at the whole picture. I don't just deal with welcoming shuls right now. I've identified welcoming communities. Are there medical resources that are available for women who want to have babies in same-sex or same-gender couples, or people that are doing transgender affirmation surgeries, or whatever it is? Are there social factors that are available in the community? Are there, what's the general culture in which that synagogue exists? Because are there schools? What about the JCC? Can you walk in there? There's all of these things that are part of it. And when I ask in terms of what it means to be welcoming, I do look for that very specific language. And I absolutely agree. We have some wonderful synagogue websites where you go to the website. I just recommended one yesterday to somebody. Go to this Orthodox shul's website. You will have no questions. They are absolutely welcoming. They do have mommy and children, and they do have a transgender person, and they do have people that, so I think a lot of it is also where they are in their own experience. And then what if somebody's graduating college, is going to graduate school, is moving to a community, they need a shul, and they need to be in that community, and it might not be the best community for them. What do they do then? So, one of the things that Miryam and I also deal with sometimes is, so be a trailblazer, go to that community, try to find yourself some friends and some advocates, and you can change the community. I live outside of Philadelphia. And if you know anything about Philadelphia, Philadelphia is one of the most amazing LGBT friendly communities anywhere. But what has changed in the last 4 years since I've begun this work is the Orthodox community is amazing. We have a situation where you can go to any shul in Center City, Philadelphia, as an LGBTQ person with your spouse. We even had somebody who actually transitioned to their affirmed gender identity, staying in the community, and everybody is great. And if people complain, the rabbis advocate. They advocate for all of these folks. And it's really an amazing thing. So there's just all these different factors that are part of the mix.
I have a question for you, Sunny, though. What do you think accounts for that special sauce down there in Center City?
I think it's a combination of a lot of things that happened at the same time. I don't think it's any one thing. I really don't.
Like
I
people
think
sort of
it's
coming out
educating
and-
people. It's,
Yeah.
I mean, I work around all kinds of issues. Like years ago, I was in San Antonio working around multi-faith dialogue. That's another one of my big things. And they were amazing. And I said to them, guys, make sure that every one of your rabbis in their, in everything they do in the congregations when they go to rehire, get somebody committed to this, because you don't want to lose the progress you've made. I think sometimes, Miryam, there's just a good tsunami of wonderful dynamics where everything just comes together. We have two, not one, but two of the best national medical centers for transgenders to have gender affirmation surgery and all of the support services. This is all huge, and lots of schools and graduate schools. So I don't know what the magic is, but I think you can make it in your own shuls, and I think you can make it in your communities. And my point before, Rabbi Bender, was that, and I'm sure you agree with me, is that my point is to be honest, to be able to say, like you said, so this community didn't work for you as well, and this community worked better. The shul can do everything it can do. You can do everything you can as a rabbi, but ultimately people need more than that too.
So the question was someone who wants to walk into a shul for the first time and not want to dim their identity, correct?
Yeah.
I kind of had a sort of the opposite side experience as rabbi who was just in placement. And so what I did was similar to what I probably would suggest to people. I mean, I guess it depends if they show up on a Friday and go into a shul, that's not as much time. But if you know you have a couple of days, I suggest the phone call. And just to be really, really honest, when I was going and shul shopping as a rabbi, I called and asked about the LGBTQ plus community. I said, can you please put me in touch with members of said community? And it's telling if they can't. And of course, with my new congregation, when I came down and I met with a room full of people, you know, socially distanced and things like that, I knew for me that this was a congregation to go, and not just as rabbi, but also a place where I'd want to raise God willing, a family with my wife. So I think that if you can spare the phone call to actually get on the phone with someone and ask if there's members of the community who'd be open to share their real lived experiences, then I think if you can warrant that, I think that's a great way to go.
I would echo Rabbi Bender. I can also recognize that one of the later questions I'll kind of touch on, Marissa. I'm sorry to take your thunder, but you know, in this moment of COVID, right? Like walking into the building, not what most of us are doing at this point in time, and the opportunities to really get a feel for things is really easy anonymously in a way that it hasn't been previously. I know that there are people joining our Friday night services live stream, and I have no idea who they are. And after a few weeks, people tend to feel more comfortable like introducing themselves. So I think this is actually a really wonderful time to try things out if someone's a little nervous about making that phone call. And to recognize that, you know, as important as language is, we all slip up, right? As much as we should use gender neutral language and couple or partner or more general terms, we don't always. So don't judge, you know, everyone with the first thing that you see, and recognize that there may not be obviously LGBT people in the community, but that doesn't mean that they're not there. I'm in Kalamazoo, Michigan. I would not have thought that this would be like a huge community, but the Gay Community Center is a very hopping place. So you don't know unless you're willing to ask.
Yeah, and that like you said, Rabbi Schicker, you were going to potentially steal my thunder, which is totally fine. It's a great segue. In the COVID world, most people aren't going into physical spaces, to whether it's a community center like the JCC or a synagogue or a day school or what have you. So when we're looking to find community, does the community need to be geographically close, or is it more important to find like the right fit? Because when it comes one day, when the world is back to normal or whatever that is, what if you fall in love with someplace that's like in San Francisco and you live in Boone, North Carolina, which is where I previously lived. So I guess, so does the community need to be geographically close, or is it more important that you feel comfortable in the online space as is for right now?
So can I just respond to that a little bit? I think I would say do both, or consider both, because also I think, and we've said this to our rabbis in the Welcoming Schools Project, this is an amazing moment. One of the big things in all of this, we can talk about what's the best thing to do and what's the best language and all that. But here's the real secret, guys. They need to know you. It's not the phenomenon of LGBT community walking in the door. It's getting to know Elizabeth or Eleonora or Andre or whoever. It's getting to know who you are. The way the Welcoming Schools Project began was, I know a lot of rabbis. I have a lot of connections in the Orthodox world, and my family is a very visible family. And I would call them and say, look, I'm doing this work in Eshel, we're starting, this is what we're doing. Are you aware of this issue? And it was really at the beginning of all of this, but this is how I got the first rabbis on board. I said, you know, my daughters, Rachel and Tali, they're both gay. Would you let them in your shul? And they were like, oh, I would love to see Rachel and Tali. I love Rachel and Tali. They're amazing. And no one ever refused me that. And when Eshel parents get together and we all have similar stories for our kids, it's about getting to know people. That's a big part of this too. Just put yourself out there, show, just be you, be everything you are, not just that you're gay, but that you're a lawyer or that you're a rabbi or that you're an educator or that whatever it is, and that you like to play chess or whatever. And the thing that this COVID thing has provided us with is lots of opportunities to practice, to just let people get to know us. They don't need to know all of these specifics because frankly, it's not even on the board right now. But it may also give each one of you or each one of us a sense of what kinds of communities we're looking for. Sometimes the person looking doesn't know what they're looking for. So I think that's a piece of the equation also.
I agree. I think it's bold. I know that CBS, I was just checking on my phone so I didn't say a false fact here, not gonna, never, a false fact, we'll go with that. CBST is having a streaming free high holiday service. I think there's things like that. There's being able to have a safe space, and we know that, especially for queer individuals who might be in an area where they are the solo queer individual, or so they think, even though that might not be true. It's so important to have that safe space for your mental health, for a sense of community, while also I think exploring exactly what Dr. Epstein said. Everyone go to CBST. You can come to my synagogue as well, but I'm not as fabulous as CBST.
I was going to mention CBST, Rabbi Benner. But it's also, and I agree with everything Dr. Epstein said, it's also about the opportunity, once we're allowed to gather again, having that close connection, right? I can say my mother, who has none of it, my mother likes to stream services from New York City. because she likes the cantor at the one synagogue. So she streams services from there, but she belongs locally as well, because there are things your local community can do for you and be for you that a community on the other side of the country might not be able to, not because they don't want to, but because of geographic limitations. And so there's benefits and there's drawbacks to all of these things. And recognizing what more you might want from a community is an aspect of that. Is it just services? Is it, is it get-togethers? Is it learning, right? That there's all those other pieces that we're looking at as well, and not just, fitting is important, but being fulfilled is also important in what you're looking for.
I totally agree with you. I also just want to add that, we are in this amazing moment where you can drop into any synagogue anywhere almost, and it's kind of amazing. And having said that, what we're discovering with our groups, like we have support and social groups across North America and Canada, like Eshel pockets where people can connect with each other about being Orthodox and LGBTQ, not in a synagogue setting, but the reason why I'm sharing this is because it's such an interesting phenomenon, I think, is that, we have this group called the Brooklyn Women's Group, and women are showing up from all over, the world, mostly in North America. But, and I was talking to the facilitator of it today, and I said, do you want to change it to women's group? And she was like, no, actually, this is a characteristic. The original women love that it's Brooklyn. When this is all over, we will go back to our meeting space in Crown Heights. And I think that people are drawn to like a character of something. And we have women actually who call in from Northern California because they grew up in Brooklyn. So, the head of meetups.com, I read this somewhere, said that the more specific a group is, the more likely it is that people will show. So like if you have hikers who have Rottweilers and love to hike by streams with their same-sex partner, meet up. That will have many more people show up than, hikers with dogs. So anyway, I just wanted to share that fun fact that I discovered through all of this. Okay, Rabbi Bender, I'm going to sign you up with your Rottweiler, with Isaiah.
Great. So this will be, I think, probably the last question before we turn it over to the audience to ask some questions. On the alternate side of the coin, we've talked about like what it looks like to be welcomed, what it looks like to be in a welcoming space, and what does it look like if you're to not be welcomed? Like, what should you be looking for in those spaces besides like a weird vibe? You can expand on that how you will.
So in the Welcoming Shuls project process, we ask very specific questions about, can somebody get an aliyah? Can somebody lead davening from the Amud? Would a bat mitzvah, bar mitzvah, a simchat bat, a brit milah be celebrated? Would they advocate for the kids to go to school? Have they had any experience? I think that experience to me is very important. One of the first questions we ask is, what seminal experience did you have in your life, either professional or personal, that colors how you personally accept LGBT folks in the community? And I think it's experience. It's finding out if this place is for real. And I would also say that it correlates with, for example, how are women treated? How are Jews of color treated? How are people in different family situations treated? If it's a factor, what about intermarried couples? What about recent converts? What about, I mean, you can just add to the list. I see whoever there, Elizabeth, I see you're shaking your head. Yes, it's, I think that goes back to what Rabbi Bender and the rest of us have been saying about, all right, fine. Don't just talk the talk, walk the walk. Don't just tell us you're this, but give us examples. What is an example to you of feeling that? When the Chabad rabbi near us that we go to sometimes says to me, every time he sees me, when are Rachie and Tali going to come? I really want to meet them. I looked them up when you told me to, and they sound like amazing people, and I want to meet their wives, Liz and Mimi. That's welcoming, folks. And it's can I be a normal person here? Can I walk in, be a normal person, be who I am, and not be a walking advertisement for something? Just like Rabbi Schicker said, you're not representative of all Reform Jews, and Rabbi Bender, and none of us are representative of that group per se. We're just representative of us. But if I walk in and I have a label on my head, that's not going to work. I just need to be a person. I want to know that I don't have to hide who I am, and I don't have to eclipse all the other things I am as well. So if you feel like that's the case, then that's not a place to go. And again, I have a conversation. I ask very specific, if I think that someone is not comfortable, I say to them, would I be correct in assuming, let me say what you don't want to say, Rabbi. Would I be correct in saying that a single sex or single gender couple would not do well in your shul? And they say yes. I want honesty. I want honesty. And I think that's the best we can ask for. And I agree, we're not all there yet, no matter where we are, no matter how far to the left we are. That being said, we all have specific challenges, and we're going to have to walk some of these rabbis through it. And guys, a lot of it, and here I will make a generalization, it is generational. Not 100%, not 100%. I can tell you the exceptions on both sides, but generally, a generalization is only as good as the exceptions that make it a generalization. But the younger rabbis, I would say 40-ish and under, I find generally a much less complex sell, if you will. And the older ones, it's more complicated sometimes. That's just reality, but not all the time.
Yeah, so I just want to add to what Sunny said, if that's okay. I think orthodoxy is really certain. There's no one Orthodox community. There's like hundreds and hundreds of synagogues, different stripes, different kind of vibe, different cultures, like we were saying before. And our theory of change is like, if you leave, and this doesn't mean that people have to stay. And most people that we work with, half the people I would say leave because it's not healthy for them, and that's totally understandable. But we are trying to make change within Orthodoxy so that change will happen. Because when people leave, then nobody has to deal with what it means to be queer in your Orthodox synagogue or space. So I would just say that like this change is slow, and we try to educate around certain like basic things. And one of those basic things is not to make assumptions about sexuality or gender. That's like one of the most basic things. Not to assume if you're with a friend that's your husband, if you're a woman or whatever. So that's like, we're starting like from very basic stuff. There was a question in the chat.
I can answer also to the, no, should we address the question first, or should we answer?
Why don't you, we'll come back to it.
Yeah, we'll come back to it in the Q&A. We'll get to it. But if you want to answer the original question.
Right. So I think I'm going to answer this in more meta way. We're dealing with a lot of issues of growth in the conservative movement, we can say. With all the love in my heart, I think we're working on a lot of things. I think we screw up a lot. I think we try our best, but we ultimately screw up a lot. But what I try to impress upon my congregation and my former congregation is when you're not welcoming of one person for whatever reason it is, whether it be because of their gender, sexuality, because, of their perceived ethnicity, because of different kinds of inclusion, ability and disability issues. You're not just cutting off that one person, you're cutting off the tree of life there. Their potential kids, if they should choose to have them, their aunts, their uncles, their cousins, their parents. You're cutting off a whole branch. You're honking off the whole tree. So when you're not welcoming, you're really not welcoming the whole generation. So a huge issue right now also in conservative Judaism is being welcoming of interfaith couples. And that's something I try to impress upon the congregation. Now you just pissed off someone's great-grandparents and you lost this family for all time. So and I think that's exactly the same issue with LGBTQ plus people. So it's a multi-generational issue when you're not welcoming.
So I saw that Elizabeth had asked a question, and I actually responded personally because I didn't realize it went to everyone. But the question was how the kind of disconnect in an Orthodox world about not performing marriages versus being inclusive. And that is something that we've definitely struggled with. That is not a question that I ask because there's halachic reasons for that. And it's sort of creating problems where we have enough to deal with. We don't need to create additional problems. We do have Orthodox rabbis that are performing marriages, are performing conversions. I'm making, and Miryam's making those shidduchim all the time. So we have enough of a support system within our own ranks. And then we'll see what happens. And, look, the world has changed so much in the 4 years I've been doing this. Get back to me in another 2 years. It's almost precipitous how quickly the changes, though not everybody necessarily feels or benefits to the fullest from the change, but it is happening. I'm dealing with complex situations right now that people couldn't even articulate 4 years ago. And we're finding rabbis, and I'm getting not just YCT, not just the liberal Orthodox or what, of course, I just want to make one quick comment about that. I grew up in the 60s and 70s, and I was just called Orthodox. Now I'm called liberal Orthodox, open Orthodox, modern Orthodox, whatever, and right, Rabbi Schicker, and maligned by the right. So, go figure, talk about changing language. But I think that it is changing, and when I get a rabbi who's honest and says, I can't do that, I'm not comfortable with that, I will be glad to welcome them. So I get these rabbis to get back to me, or I tell the rabbis to tell the people to get back to me, and then we send them to rabbis, and we have had marriages performed that way. So that is what is happening right now. And I would just, again, in terms of normalizing it, you're not going to choose every single neighborhood or every single house to live in, right? And you'll choose your community, and we'll get you a rabbi who can marry you. We get rabbis who can convert, all of that. And then we can send people to shul. So that's how it works at this point in time. But thank you for the question. So it's an important one.
It's a great question. Yeah. I mean, there's so much that goes into a synagogue, like the politics, the board. And so like what Sunny said is like, we're sort of decoupling the like life cycle rituals that LGBTQ Orthodox people need and want from the locus of the synagogue and the power of the rabbinic leader, because it's DIY, we have to do it ourselves. And having said that, I know that, first of all, the one thing about marriage is like, that is the kind of breaking point for a lot of Orthodox rabbis. Like they'll say, oh, of course we welcome, an LGBTQ person, or like a kid comes out and they want to be compassionate. But once you start talking about like a partnership, then they start getting all crazy, because that's exactly where the Torah prohibition, they think, lies for men and rabbinically for women. So that freaks them out, and they're like, okay, I was good with the kid who came out, compassion, acceptance, but now you want to talk about getting married? I'm so sorry. Like, I can't even start that conversation. So we actually, let's give one quick example of a shul that we were working closely with in Manhattan. And we came in and we sort of had like a welcoming shul Shabbat where we sort of, we brought our community members from Eshel to have dialogue with the Orthodox members of the shul. And there was one gay man, there's a few LGBTQ people in the shul itself, and one of them got married, and civilly, and yeah, and not religiously. And the rabbi wasn't gonna like say Mazel Tov for some reason. Those words are magical. If you say them, something, it means something bigger. I mean, I'm making a joke, but basically the rabbi wouldn't say the word Mazel Tov to them. And then after like having us come in a few months, they revisited it, and the gentleman who got married wanted to have a kiddush for his marriage, and the rabbi was open to it, and it was like a cultural shift. But this was a big deal, so that's my story.
So very quickly, to add to Miryam's story, when our daughter Rachel and Liz decided to get married, first of all, it was a very different type of ceremony. We didn't use Kedushin language. We did it very differently. This was the way they wanted to do it. They wanted a very authentic, experiential coupling that reflected who they are, not take the language that was not really meaningful to them, although I'm not sure what the Zuzim and the goats have to do with me either, but that's besides the point. But Steve Greenberg was very involved. Steve and Rachel and I really worked on it together, and it was a beautiful, beautiful ceremony. We happen to belong to a black hat shul that has us and others who are there, and we wanted to have a kiddush. And what we did was we had a kiddush. First, we did a kiddush at our house that like 40 people came to. Then in shul, we had a kiddush. It turned out that it was a time where all four of our children had passed a certain threshold. Our oldest child just had a child. Another one just graduated medical school. Another one was getting married, and the fourth had graduated high school. So what we did was we did a kiddush in honor of all of our children, named all of them, including Rachel and Liz, and everybody came over to Rachel and Liz and wished them Mazel Tov. So it can be done. It's just, you know, different. The same thing isn't going to work in every single situation, but you figure out what can this particular shul handle. And I'm very cool with trying to push people from their comfort zone to their courage zone. I don't want them to freak out and have coronaries, but, you know, be a little courageous. And if you kind of use baby steps with people, I think we get to where we want to go eventually.
Thank you so much. So we had a question come in to the chat. What can we as a community do to make youth groups feel more welcoming? I'm guessing feel more welcoming for LGBTQ plus youth is the assumption. Yeah, Rabbi Bender, you automatically like.
I know.
Ready? Let's go.
I got really excited when I saw that. I love, you know, well, whatever, Judaism and Jewish youth groups and such. So I used to be a BBYO advisor, and last year, and so I'm a weird movement person. I do BBYO even though I'm conservative, whatever. But they came up with new language. I am not sure how well it's integrated across the international sphere, but they sent it to all of the people who are in charge usually of making gendered spaces and taught them how to not do that all the time, how to not just say brotherhood and sisterhood, how to make things more open, allow people to choose pronouns. And maybe I can schlep around on my computer and try to find the document and send it to Marissa after this. But it was a very lovely worded document because this is a very old organization, BBYO, as you may or may not know. And they've always had this gendered space, and they're trying to work on it. I know the region I used to be on had a whole weekend that was dedicated to queer space and breaking down those barriers of gendered space. Of course, they still had the meetings at the end where they broke off into where people would be comfortable going. So they still haven't really broken down those barriers, but I think that they're at least working towards it, which gives me hope. So yeah, I think modeling, especially for for teens. Modeling is very important. Modeling that it's okay to experiment. It's okay to try to figure out what your pronouns are and what your sexuality is and what gender you're feeling that day, and how, and showing that it's not set in stone. It doesn't have to be set in stone your entire lifetime, I think, is especially important for those age groups.
I'll say that I was, as a student, I was in NIFTY. I grew up in the Texas-Oklahoma region, and it was the most welcoming space, which no one likes to believe when I share, because it was Texas and Oklahoma. But I mean, there was just no question in regards to the acceptance piece, in regards to how people chose to, you know, and this was 12, 15 years ago, right? And even when the individual synagogues, right, like the leadership or something else may not have been as welcoming, the youth space was much more welcoming. And I think really that goes to what Sunny was saying about the generational differences. But I didn't recognize my sexuality until after high school, but I realized that that environment and that acceptedness between not only my peers, but all of the adult leadership allowed for that development. That I was okay with who I was because I'd been in spaces where it was never questioned. And I think that we need to have a role in doing that. And along with BBYO, I know that, I always forget the other group's name, that also always had gendered male and female. The Rosh Chodesh groups for girls and the other group for boys have also started doing specifically queer programming, very intentionally. And so a lot of these groups are working towards not only the language and the resources, but also the training of the adult staff in how to have these conversations and how to set up oneself to be the ally that's needed in these moments.
Great. So we are actually, we're running close. It's almost 7. So we're going to go ahead and wrap up. Rabbi Schicker, Miryam, Sunny, do you have any closing thoughts or any last minute tips of advice, things that you want to say that you feel you didn't say yet?
I would just say, I'm really glad that Rabbi Schicker just said what she did, because I see it with the kids and with, you know, the 20s and 30 something there. Just a very quick thing. I'm from the generation that queer meant something horrible. And I have one of the closest friends in my life, what I call one of my siblings by choice, is a gay man that I've been extremely close with since I was 18. Okay, so I've known him most of my life. In fact, I kept trying to fix him up with girlfriends of mine, and he wasn't interested, and he wouldn't tell me he was gay. And I said, why didn't you tell me? He said, because, Sonny, you're an Orthodox Jew. You wouldn't like me anymore. And I'm like, you're ridiculous. And he's still one of my closest friends. He's part of our family, the whole thing. So I called him when my daughter Rachel said, you know, Mom, we're a queer family. And I said, Jerry, I think I need you to sit down for this. I said, what would you say if Rachel said that we're a queer family? And he freaked out. He said, why would she say that? That's a terrible thing to say. And this is a gay man. So I think one of the things that I would say is, guys, those of you that are in your 20s and 30s and younger, a little bit older, I say it all the time to all of you. I say, Baruch Hashem, thank God that we're at this time, in this place, and in this space, because it's so much, it may not be there yet, whatever there is, but it's so much closer. And you guys are going to help us get there. My dad had a first cousin. She's still alive. She's in her late 80s, and she is pissed at the world. And she's a gay woman, and she lived just an angry, angry woman. I, in fact, wrote her a letter. She used to come to our house when we were younger, and I told her, Bernice, this is our family, da, 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 da. Would you like to be? She doesn't want any parts of any of us, because she lived through what she lived through, and it was just different. So I would say patience. Everybody's not going to be there yet. And you know what? You will be the teachers. You will, by your grace, by your respect, by your showing that you understand where people are, you will help them advocate and be your friends. And once they get to know you, like they've gotten to know my daughters, I think it'll be so much better.
I just want to quickly add to that because we're running out of time, but yes, we are getting there, but it's really slow. So if you're interested in looking at an Orthodox synagogue, if you're a queer person, I want to suggest bring an ally with you and do your homework. Contact Sunny. She has this huge database and she can let you know, like, where you're going to feel comfortable and how, and all the details if you need to know. So yeah, I would say, we're trying to prevent people from getting hurt, damaged, and still stay connected to their, what they love. If they love Orthodoxy, they should have it. It belongs to you. It doesn't belong to the rabbi. So we want to make that possible for you.
I think also just be patient, just keep being patient with the process and have a safe space for yourself to land, especially as you're trying to navigate new spaces. I know in my own experience, I think I've had multiple comings out at different kinds of times, both my own coming out as queer and then when as an engaged person coming out as queer, and then God willing coming out as a queer family in March. And how that just kind of, congratulations, hi Simone, how that keeps changing, and how that also your space within a congregation changes as well as that happens. I think maybe especially in an Orthodox space where it might be more accepting as a single person, and then as Miryam and Sunny have been sharing. So just to have patience and also to have that grounding, have that safe space to land as you continue to navigate your own evolution within the space.
Yeah, I'll echo with what Rabbi Bender said, and to say that, find those allies. Like, even if it's someone who's not, within the congregation that you're looking to be a part of, right? That there's more to our Jewish community than our synagogue structure, right? Whether it's a JCC or a school, or just the fact that you have friends who belong to multiple different places, that Judaism has room for all of us. We have to find our own ways, often in a way that might require us to stretch, might require others to stretch, but there is space, and I'm easily findable if anybody wants help with that, and have friends across the movements. Rabbi Bender and I know each other from our time in Israel together. So, and thank you all for joining us. The questions were great.
So one more thank you to all of our wonderful panelists, Rabbi Bender, Rabbi Schicker, Miryam, and Sunny. Miryam and Sunny have put their information in the chat. Rabbi Bender just put Rabbi Bender's information in the chat. And so there are ways to get in contact, and there's Rabbi Schicker's. I will definitely be following you on Twitter if I don't already. Thank you, everyone, for coming out. Don't forget to check out HillelHome.org for other upcoming sessions, and be sure to register for Motivote to win prizes as you register, and register your friends to vote. Also, thank you to Keshet for co-sponsoring this event. Keshet works for the full equality of LGBTQ Jews in Jewish life. Learn more at the link that was added to the chat above. And with that, I wish you all a good night. Shana Tova.
Everybody.
And have a sweet, sweet New Year, and may we be inscribed in the book of life.
Amen.
Amen.
Everyone, be well. Keep doing great things.